Hi, and thanks for joining me once again. Today, I'm lucky to be joined by Andy Colbert, who is with Ziegler Capital. And Ziegler, is it Ziegler Capital, Andy? I'm sorry.
Yep, Ziegler Capital. Thank you.
And the Ziegler is more than 100-year-old company, but Andy is not. He's a young and healthy guy, at least compared to me. So, Andy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I know that Ziegler's a big operation, but your concentration is to help group practices. So tell me, how are group medical practices dealing with the coronavirus?
Yeah, certainly it's a wide realm of different reactions in different situations. Groups that are heavily dependent on elective procedures and certainly more outpatient oriented, volumes could be down as much as 70%. Groups that are more hospital based and more tied to inpatient business or more critical procedures, maybe you're only down 30%. So it's definitely a wide spectrum. I think most importantly, we're finding, generally speaking, physician groups tend to be faring fairly well as you could expect. They're putting in place largely, voluntary staffing cuts and compensation cuts. Certainly partners are kind of taking compensation reductions. I think the groups that particularly are finding it easier also are the groups that don't have as much overhead or capital expenditures or facility costs. So those are groups that I think are easier to kind of adapt to these dynamics.
We had on our news site, we had your PowerPoint presentation or your webinar. And in that you talked about stress testing. And I'm not a financial guy, but would you touch on that just for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one of the things that I am speaking a lot to groups about now is, no question, you got to identify your current cash availability and your financial resources and make sure that you can get through the next 3 to 6 months on kind of a true, worst case scenario. If you assume that volumes stay the way they are, what's your current trajectory look like and how many months of operating expenses do you have, right? So that's kind of the absolute base case. But then what we're advising groups is really creating kind of action plans and tiers of analysis on certain recovery volume levels so that you're working to put a plan together now that says, okay, if we're down 70% currently, when volumes get to 50%, what does that mean? When volumes get to 40% down, 20% down, 10, so that you have the metrics and the mechanics in place, what it means in terms of staff return and operating initiatives. But also if volumes do come back down, you're putting those procedures and plans in place now. Because one of the things that we're really trying to avoid is a situation where groups are kind of making on-the-fly decisions. And so the way I refer to it is really, setting action triggers and making sure you're really communicating effectively across your leadership team around what those action triggers are and what the required actions are with each associated trigger.
Okay, what sources of financing exist for group practices?
Yeah, so there's a whole host of federal dollars that are available. There's the about the $2 trillion package that was passed by the federal government that includes a number of different capital pools. There's the PPP loans that certainly people are pretty familiar with. There was the initial round of funding that I think was like a $350 billion package, and then recently there was another $300 billion additional package. So groups are certainly encouraged to apply for that. That is a forgivable loan as long as you can keep the majority of your staff on payroll There's also this new package that was just recently announced this week is the Main Street Lending Program. Those are loans, I think up to about 25 million. It's about a $600 billion pool of capital, so not insignificant. And then there's also grants that the government has made available through the CARES Act, about $100 billion. There was a couple tranches of that that's gone out, some of it to groups based on either the Medicare percentage or total reimbursement pool. So that's something that's, groups have at their disposal. And then of course there's private capital options as well, whether it's banks, debt type funds that are these more FinCos or BDCs, and then there's also more traditional equity sources as well.
Wow, that's a lot. I wondered about if, as part of PPP, I know that the funds have to be allocated to the to payroll, but if you're operating at 70%, that means that you must not have people working. So how do you pay employees to not work? And if they're on unemployment, do they lose that? It's complicated, huh?
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, it's that's part of the calculation that companies have to do. The other thing you got to keep in mind is it is public record if you take the PPP. Right. And some groups have decided not to take it just purely because they don't want that on public record.
I see.
Something just to keep in mind. There's also, some, requirements around what income levels it applies to, and it, typically doesn't, apply to individuals making more than, I think, 100,000, give or take. The calculation formula. Yeah.
Any advice for group practice? Just 1 or 2 sentences?
Biggest advice would just be, start planning now for not just the near-term recovery and how you're going to manage that, but I think it's a really good opportunity for groups to use this time to do a formal SWOT analysis on the strengths and weaknesses of your practice, and use the time to really do some real heavy strategic thinking around what are some of the gaps in your service model, and what are some of the weaknesses and holes in the practice, whether it be management team or technology or infrastructure, and where are some of the opportunities in the market? Because I do believe that coming out of this recovery, it's going to create opportunities for groups that are more entrepreneurial and more aggressive around really taking advantage of market share. Patients are going to be looking for more convenient care options. They're going to be looking for more telemedicine capabilities. Groups that are embracing that, I think, are going to see a greater degree of pickup than groups that are kind of still practicing more kind of legacy-based medicine. And so I do believe that there's a real opportunity here to be innovative and use that to gain market share and really think about your 5-year plan as you have time now to really investigate and think strategically.
Okay, well, Andy Colbert, you're a very thoughtful and clearly knowledgeable person, and I appreciate you spending time with me.